Well, welcome to the Small Brand Mentality Listeners Club, the inaugural episode. For those of you who are reading along in the Substack or seeing this for the first time, welcome along. And we're joined by Will Baldwin and myself. Will, say hey to the people.
Hey, people.
So I wanted to invite my friend and running buddy Will Baldwin to explore this first episode and kind of introduce the concept of small brand mentality, because I think Will is a really cool perspective from an athlete perspective, a coach perspective, and somebody who converges with brands. Will has really seen a large scale and scope of people approaching the industry for the first time as a participant, to folks who are in the sub-elite committed improver space, to being a training partner to pros, and has also worked with some large brands like Hoka, and also works with Sundog from the race production side. So there's a lot of things that he has from a perspective sense that I think will ask some pretty good questions to keep us moving. Thanks for being my companion here, Will.
Dude, I'm stoked. Yeah. Well, 2 sentence background on me. I'm Will Baldwin. I've been a running coach and a runner for a long time and do a lot of stuff in the running world with different races and brands and organizations. But yeah, we're here to talk with Drew and learn a little more about small brand mentality and dive into some of those cool topics. So start off, Drew. Tell me a little about yourself. What's your background in this world?
Yeah, thank you. So I have probably been a runner a little bit, less time than you will, I would guess, and then definitely at a lower operating altitude in terms of ability. But we've converged. We are on the same team now, just a few groups back.
We did the exact workout today.
That's true. We just do the same exact workout. Paces were a little different, but so yeah, I came from a team sports background, and it was my avenue to running through organized sense in high school, and then kind of fell out of love with it before returning to it on my own accord through like the lens of the marathon. And that personal journey has kind of evolved over time, like what I want out of running and where I choose to do it and what surfaces I do it on. But I'm very fortunate that I also work in the running industry and combine that passion with profession. So I started off professionally working for Tracksmith back in the day as an early employee, and very fortunate to say I was back in technically 2017 or 2018, started working as a retail employee and community associate, leading run clubs back part-time when I was working in tech, because I knew I wanted to work there, and moved full-time in 2019, right before the pandemic, right in the fall, September 3rd of 2019. I will always remember that date. And have since, after kind of growing the career there through the customer experience and then marketing lens, now I work for Salomon. I manage sports and community marketing for North America, and very pleased to be in that position as of May 13th, 2024.
Did you know in college you wanted to work in the running industry? I mean, I know you thought, oh, cool.
Well, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer when I went to college. And I mean, surprise, surprise, I'm not. This is like my worst kept secret. I have some things on the wall behind me, but diplomas are not one of them. They're in a closet somewhere. But I wanted to be an attorney. Come from a very visually and musically creative family, and it's so cool. My brother is a composer of classical music. My parents are visual artists, and they're all educators. So they take that skill and they kind of bring it to the masses through education, which is super cool. So I thought it'd be really fun to be an attorney that kind of supports what the creatives do, whether that's copyright, trademark, any type of like agreements that protect what they do. I don't come from the hard science background, so I can't do patents, right? Like that's not what I am capable of doing. But there's things like soft IP is what they call it, soft intellectual property. And I was like, oh, it'd be cool to do that. And then I was like, what if I did this for Nike? That would be the coolest thing ever. So during my law school experience, when I went to Northeastern,
You already had that vision that you were gonna like work in conjunction with those creatives, but like Was it running specific creatives or just creatives
Not
in
at the
general?
time. Yeah, not at the time. Yeah, I thought it would be cool to find some ways to converge with people who are, like, creative, but, uh, when I got into law school, this was, like, after my running journey
Yeah.
reignited, and then I was like, "Oh, that would be so sick if I could be an attorney for a running company," and thought of, like, the Big 4, right, that are all in the Portland area or in Oregon generally, and I tried so hard to get an internship there to see what it was like, or like, I don't know, become like a summer associate and try to move in that direction. But I got kind of in the ballpark of it. Like I interned for the UFC for a semester. So I was in
Forgot
Vegas.
that.
Yeah. So that was like a look in the sports world. I worked for venture accelerators, so like incubators for people with ideas to develop them from scratch into a company that exists, like as a legal advisor, which is super cool. But as I got closer to that position, it seemed like the lawyer was less of the alternative and supportive creative mind in the room, and they were there to tell you where your blind spots were and to tell you no to many things. So that's when I was like, "Oh, I don't know if this is what I wanna do."
Dude, it's funny that you say like you kind of saw yourself as like a support to creatives or your family's creative because I see you that way so much. And that's why I was really excited when you wanted to start this project and you started writing. Because I've seen you do a couple different projects or make a few things and like you have a really cool sense of design and like some serious skill when it comes to like the visual representation thing of things and presentations and I just knew that you were going to have like a really cool view on this and some good takes and so um yeah, I've just always been a fan of your work in general and obviously we're friends but I just actually like the stuff you've made and the things you do and so
Thanks.
yeah, I was excited to see this. So with that, let's talk about small brand mentality. What is it and what made you want to start this?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking of when I was a tracksmith, like many people, I'm just constantly surrounded by content and I'm surrounded by uh brand activations, media, just things that we're seeing in real life, let alone like the products that we use ultimately, right? And I think that a lot of us have opinions and it usually turns into like long run discussion.
Mm.
Like, was this cool? Was it not? Was this impactful? And I love the time and place for those kind of like open forum, not being recorded hot take sessions. But
Yeah.
I professionally was like, well, what if I tried to challenge myself to slim down my view of my opinion? Because the opinion exists for a reason, right? Something feels authentic or inauthentic because of X. But I don't think we take the time to acknowledge that often, or at least I did not. And I think oftentimes I don't. I just have knee jerk reactions. This is cool. This is not cool. I like that. I don't like that. And when I was a tracksmith, I was like, you know what? What if I took some time? And some of those projects that started off were related to like Hoka's activation at the marathon trials, like where they did the Fly Lab and they did the Sidious Cafe, right? Like all of those things that I didn't even get to see in person, but from a digital perspective, I was like, whoa, they did this. And then they also connect with these athletes. And then they made these custom kits with the family's names integrated into them. So I was thinking of, with the Hoka activation, for example, at the marathon trials, how they were able to connect the product launch to the media arm to this experiential environment, all of these things that made this brand feel larger than life, and connecting these elements. I thought it was super cool. I'm like, well, why does that feel cool? As opposed to just saying that, right? And through these exercises and case studies, I feel like it's helpful to me as a marketer to see what the world is doing, but then kind of dissect the parts that feel true or feel untrue. And I think for others, it's helpful for them to kind of engage in the same thought because what is true to me may not be true to you, right? I might think something is cool and Will, you might think the opposite. But we know exactly why we have these opinions. So long way of getting there, but this small brand mentality is like a platform that I wanted to create and kind of challenge myself to engage in these case studies and learning opportunities, not only from what I consume, but also from the opinions of people around me. Hopefully, like they choose to engage with me and say, like, I don't agree with that, or did you know, did you miss this part or something of like that. So
Yeah.
that is like the impetus for the platform, but the small brand mentality kind of naming convention came out of this idea of like, I'm very fortunate to come up under the tutelage of so many great people who are at Tracksmith who were or are still there. And that kind of disrupting mentality as a running brand, I think is really interesting to me. It's not always the most cost effective. It's not always the most like penetrative from a market perspective, but there's some kind of intangible around that approach. And that's something that I hope to bring to what I see in the world, but then also what I bring to my now large brand that I work for. And I think it could flip things on its head a little bit, hopefully, with some learnings.
Dude, do you I think I think it's super cool what you're trying to do. For one, like you talked about watching brands do these things, talking about stuff the way you're going to. I think it's really fun when we do acknowledge those things that resonate with us or feel authentic because it's so easy that for that knee-jerk reaction to be negative. And sometimes we don't like point out when things are really cool, especially if you work at a company, you kind of just like, yeah, like when I'm at an event with a company, they just kind of say everything every other company does was lame or cheesy. But it's like, it's cool when you can recognize, like, oh man, like that was a cool thing. Should we do that for our brand? And like, I think it's how you grow. Like, and we've talked about this before, like big brands can take things from these small brands and vice versa of like really good ideas or things that are disruptive. Um, but I thought I had when you were at Tracksmith, like, are they still considered small brand? Like, or was that a transition from you guys of like starting grassroots, but now it's like they kind of feel almost established or like the man now?
That's true. I don't have, information on, like, market share of, like, where the company was when I started versus where it was when I left in 2024, um, but it definitely felt different for sure. I mean, one of my favorite quotes from Matt Taylor, the CEO and founder, he said that back in the day, I think around the time that I started, he's like, "I knew everybody who was wearing this stuff, so when I went for a run on the Charles River in Boston, it was like a Jeep Wave, like, you knew that they got it, right? It was like they took a chance on this new brand, they see the value in it, and then he was like, "The cool thing is we would have these pop-ups, and I wouldn't know anyone who was in the room." And that to your point, right, like, when validation progresses outside of your scope, right? And understanding of who's even there and who's taking the chance on it, super cool. And like from a dollars perspective, I don't have the numbers to support it, but I agree. I mean, it's the brand is 10 years on, but when you think about like the way that brand moves and what makes them successful in some endeavors is the way that they're producing in ways, right? Like about a year ago, a great example of this is from a content perspective, a lot of brands are moving towards these like ready for YouTube ads, right? 30-second clips that you can skip over in 15 seconds just to get awareness out there. And on the other side of the coin, Tracksmith produced a 90-minute continuous film of just somebody running with music in the background of this like ethereal music, somebody running in Rollinsville, continuous shot out the back of a car, and that is it. There's no narrative. There's no anything else. It is a continuous shot. Maybe it's 60 minutes. It might be an hour, but you know what I mean? Like that is completely different and what I consider to be like a more disruptive approach to content at that
Yeah,
time.
man, that's super interesting. Um, yeah, that's funny too to watch those brands go on that journey because like I do a lot of stuff with Hoka now, and everyone talks about them because they spend so much money and do so many things, but like I remember being in flag when they first started sponsoring athletes and they didn't even have a racing flat and people were racing in
Mm.
like lightweight trainers. And now it's like not a decade later, they're this massive company that, is known for spending money and they are the big guy, but like that changed really quickly. But I think that's kind of like maybe what some of the things that you're hoping to talk about and look into, like as these brands grow, how does their mindset or how they move, how does that change and what does that look like?
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm glad you said that too, because I don't think that small brand mentality is reserved for the brand with 1,000 followers and who's, like, actively in the red and seeking their Series A investment, right? Like, this is a this is an approach that people can take in departments, whether it's product or creative or marketing or logistics or anything, to support something that kind of, like, not necessarily, like, goes against the grain. I'm doing air quotes for the audio only because I think there's, uh, inflation of, like, value for people doing things differently, but there are some, like you said before, Will, there's, like, learnings that go both ways. A large brand might do something that a small brand might say, "Oh, that's a really cool thing. I haven't seen that before. We should adapt it for our brand in some way, shape, or form." And they make a choice, but it goes the other way. Like a small brand might do something that a large brand might be inspired by and want to consider in the way they approach something too.
yeah, that definitely makes sense. So like what's your goal with this project? Like it's been fun watching you write. You've put a couple things up on Substack already. Um, yeah, but like what's your vision with what you're gonna do and cover?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I think there's few different formats that could take place, right? Definitely in like the Substack newsletter side of things, right? Like that's the traditional use of Substack, but then there's also the like what we're doing now, like this listeners club thing that could be more interview based and kind of bring in personalities. But to speak to the newsletter side of things, right? The Substack platform, full stop. I'd love to kind of engage in those case studies that we see for you know, case studies around outdoor brands. So this could involve like collaborations and kind of assessing strategy and how they're going about it. It could be particular campaigns that we see they're getting that, hopefully I can dissect a little bit more. But all the while, it's promoting discussion around something that we consume and finding out like where my blind spots are. Do people agree? Do people not? Because I am not a conduit of truth. I am a person who's writing something, hopefully with enough like objective lean for people to engage with it meaningfully and not dismiss it because it's too, subjective in that way. And then on the podcast side, right, the listeners club side of things that we're starting off now, I would love to kind of bring more personalities to the room and to the discussion and to break down moments or projects or things that they've done in their portfolio with X brand, whether large, small, or anything in between, and to frame it in the scope of like doing something a little bit different and why it was successful and the process they went through to even like get it approved at a large brand versus doing a snap judgment thing at a startup to produce something, whether it's content or product. I think it would be really cool for people to understand something beneath the tip of the iceberg and to fall more in love with like the process and bringing the audience and the sport and the activity of running together.
That's awesome, man. Um, I know you've written a couple of things. What were kind of those about, and what did those look like? The first couple of things you wrote.
Yeah, so these are, I guess, a little bit of a teaser in this regard, which is pretty fun. The things that I'm writing currently, the two things that will be released in February of 2025, assuming that this is, somebody could be listening to this in 2026. Wouldn't that be crazy? Uh, but in February 2025, I have two things drafted already that are mainly collaboration based. And it's like the convergence of big brand and small brand and kind of looking into for one of them, it's like the strategy around this collaboration and maybe the vulnerabilities to both brands that they open themselves up to by working together. And then the other one is around a big brand and small brand collaborating on a shoe and what the home run strategy could be to like put that out into the world. So I guess like to tease this out, one of these is about uh Puma doing a collaboration with a brand that's probably familiar to many, even though it's on the smaller side in the US. It's called Represent 247. It's a brand from Manchester in the UK. And they did a collaborative shoe. And I wanted to dig into using this shoe created by Puma. It's been around to third edition of the shoe. And this has become sort of a collaborative canvas for the brand, right? And we talk about like maybe the strategy of why you would use this bestseller and put it out there in so many different like SKUs to get to a new audience, but then also what are the vulnerabilities of doing that? Um, and then the other one is Saucony and their upcoming third collaboration with Mint in New York around the Saucony Endorphin Elite. And we've seen teased content over the past 2 months, 3 months that they have put out over the shoe in particular. But like in the way that they've approached a pop up at the New York City Marathon in 2024 for their second collab, first one in the performance space, how could they produce this next moment together to get the most out of the partnership?
How do you feel on collabs in general?
I think collabs definitely hold a place, right? Like uh there is the age old formula of like large brand that has resources and tooling and machining and a lot of dollars works with small brand who usually has some kind of creative approach to design or create or just some kind of content or whatever just general ideas they have in the space or like a niche audience and they combine them together so this small brand gets the resources of big brand and then in some cases the big brand gets either validation in a core audience or they get like new design language that wouldn't make sense if they put it out themselves, if they like replicated something, right? Like we've seen brands put out something that looks a style that doesn't fit them. This allows them to do it and feel like more authentic in it. But I would say that they're really delicate, especially in when it comes to the sports space, because I'm of the opinion that there has to be such homogeny of like what they want out of it and to make it make sense, right? Like if these were two people in the world, these two brands, would they get coffee together? Like, and what would they talk about, right? Like almost thinking about them as people. And if they don't feel like they would ever hang out or talk in the same room, like it feels like
Yeah.
there's something that's clearly commercial about it instead of something like, oh, this clearly makes sense. So that maybe that's like an oversimplification of it, simplification, but that's what comes to mind for me.
Whatever impact they're trying to have is so effective on me. Like,
You love collabs.
I'm like an emotional shopper. Like I have this pair of Brooks that they did this series with like artists. They let them kind of like design a shoe and anything like that is like it just kind of it's it's like it feels a little bespoke, it feels different,
Right.
it feels creative and that just instantly makes the product like feel cooler and more interesting to me. Like a Ghost is now interesting, which is like, the most not boring, but just most basic regular shoe. It's a good shoe, but it's like, oh, this is cool now. Or even,
Sure.
like at Solomon, Courtney has her shoe, which is, I think it's already a shoe that exists. It's just like, here it is with like some lightning bolts on it, but like, it now feels more interesting to me. Like, I want that shoe now because, like, yeah, that stuff. I feel like nobody likes to say that like that kind of marketing works on them, but it does. I'm like, oh, or like, like this Saki, if you like the minted guys, it's like, that's a cool way. Like, there's this validation too of like, oh, these are these two things I like. And you feel really seen in a consumer sense of like, this
Yeah.
kind of shows my personality a lot.
To your point, I saw this funny clip on social that was with Believe in the Run, and I think it was Running Warehouse, some kind of like, you know, interviewing them about their hot takes in running. And one of their people from Believe in the Run was like, they were like, every A tier, S tier runner should have a signature shoe. Like we have it in basketball, we have it in whatever. And like that's a whole other can of worms to get into. But to like speak to the Courtney side of things, you know, that was in the works before I ever got there. But when you think about it, if let's say Courtney is getting a treatment of a shoe that she loves, right? It has like her name and her logos and her colors that she chose on it. It's just a different way that you can tell the story about the product in itself, other than saying like, here's a shoe on the shelf. This person really likes it. And sometimes that's enough, right? To say, well, your favorite shoe is also worn by these athletes. And you're like, oh, cool. Right. But
Yeah.
then there feels like a whole other level of endorsement when it's, you know, a co-branded endeavor to say, oh no, this person's like fully invested in this being their solution from a technical perspective. And then also their flares on it too. So it feels unique. But, you know, I think when the basketball space, there's those current talks about, are we oversaturated in basketball from a collaborative shoe thing? Nike's been
Like,
dealing
too many people have shoes?
that's what the conversation has been going on in, like, in the basketball world, particularly, you
Yeah.
know?
I mean, probably, but and I understand the business dynamics of why we don't do it in the running world, but it sucks and I hate that we don't because but yeah, same thing on another level. It's like people are really big fans of some of these athletes and it'd be cool. Like how else do you connect and like
Yeah,
and show that connection you have with that athlete? It's like you just talk about the YouTube film you watched of them all the time, you know? It's like
yeah.
and it's cool that Courtney has a shoe now, but it's like I wish more runners did so we could support them
Yeah.
and show that. But
I don't know if my ideas are fully formed on, like, athlete collab shoes at this
yeah,
point, but I will say, as a counter argument against the whole NBA, there's too many shoes, right? Like,
yeah,
there's too many signature shoes in the NBA. I would argue that there are more players in the space, in terms of brand players in the space in running, where they could still feel unique in a way. Whereas like in basketball, the main people or the main brands that are playing in the space for this uh collaborative shoe space is largely Nike, a few Adidas, Li Ning, right? Like Anta maybe, right? So there's four brands or so that are playing in the space and they own all of the properties around the athletes. So I can see that it's in more of an apples and oranges thing when we compare the sports potentially, where we have the potential for a Treyu to put out a signature shoe next to a Nike signature shoe, next to a Brooks signature shoe, next to a Solomon signature shoe. And it could feel unique in itself because all of those different shoes or different brands have different design language and different storytelling properties and different, you know, approaches to things. So maybe it could work. You know, I'm not opposed. I'm not gonna be the person to say like no way just because you know it reached saturation in basketball means that we would here too. I don't know.
I know we're both big Second Nature fans, Dylan
Yeah,
Bowman's podcast, but they did a really cool episode talking about Courtney's Solomon shoe and about like how to do that well and how well Solomon did it. Because like the big reason we don't is runners don't stay at companies forever, and these molds are really expensive, and you don't want to tie a shoe to an athlete and then they leave. And but like yeah, you can like do specific colorways for a season and stuff, and like they talked about that. But yeah, uh, I thought
well,
that was really cool.
to that same point, right? If like if you think about the signature nature of a shoe that exists in running right now, Speedland is a great example as well, right? Because every shoe they put out is tied to a specific story that
Hmm.
they tell. It's hard to tell from the naming convention, which is a whole other thing, whole other can of worms. But right, like they have one that's based on like the terrain in the Marin Headlands that has a certain thing and it's made with this athlete in mind. And it's, you know, they have one that's made for Colorado and like the color scheme and the tread and like the durometer of the foam, like all of those things are tailored.
Portland one.
Right. There's a Portland one. And I think that's a really cool way of doing the storytelling. Maybe the only thing they're missing is like more of the focal point of like the athlete, whether that's in name of like what the shoe is or the content they produce on it. But they're a really small brand, so it's like really it's hard
I like
to
back in
say.
the day they did tie that more, but yeah, I like I like how they have done both, and I like
Yeah,
the location thing, it feels fun.
yeah, I think they're a great example of like how you can iterate on a silhouette in like unique ways each time, and still sell great product consistently and not worry about like, all right, like we did the whatever shoe, it's not selling that well. It's like, well, we could see that somebody has already not cracked the code, but like they already have been doing this for a little while.
Yeah, they're such a great case study of a small brand that, like, is telling stories and yeah, I feel like having a really cool impact in that very niche specific way. I'm a big fan of what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up Second Nature because like that was, Dylan Bowman and Aaron Lucy doing that podcast was a really strong influence for me to start kind of putting some words to page and voice to mic in that regard. There's a really great community that they've put together through listenership and then to a Slack group where there's a lot of people who are industry professionals or aspiring industry professionals that are kind of chatting things out, trying to collaborate on things and just generally make connections. So I've been fortunate enough to be in that and kind of viewing this collaborative and creative culture of Ryan created. Yeah. So like I've been in that Slack group for a while and seeing people like put themselves out there from an opinion and creativity perspective was more of like a, "Hey, man, like, you can jump out of the nest too, and it doesn't have to be the scariest thing you've ever done because this is uncomfortable to put yourself
That
out there from an opinions perspective." For sure.
Yeah, dude, that's so cool. Yeah, I'm a super big Debo fan, and I love what he's doing.
Yeah.
Brings me up to another question though. You brought up the industry. You have been doing some chats with folks, like having an open door, letting people ask you questions. Can you talk about that? I think that's so cool. And as soon as you did it, I was like, oh, I want to steal this, like for my own vertical. And so
You should.
I think I will at some point. But I love what you're doing with that. If you could tell me more about it.
Thank you. I think more people should do it. So I started doing this, like, industry hour thing, uh, probably about 6 or 7 months ago. So that would be June or July in 2024. Um and when things like kind of calmed down and settled down once I moved over to Solomon and started getting my flow in the workday, I was thinking about how fortunate I was to have people take a chance on me at various stages of my career and to give me a shot. And I know how privileged it is that that's the case, right? Like for someone to take a chance on you in an industry this small is a massive privilege. So yeah, my thought was if I can open my time up to talk to people who either are looking to like flourish in the industry or break into the industry, I would love to do so for kind of a few reasons. A, I think that if we don't open the industry or encourage people to come in with their skill set from outside or different perspectives, this will be a stagnant industry. We'll miss out on a ton of talent that could ultimately push it forward.
Sometimes
Like,
people want that. There's a little bit of gatekeeping
tr-
sometimes.
that's true. Yeah, I think there's a level of like comfort and privilege to be like, hey, you can come along too, right? Like feeling secure enough in where you're at in your career where you're like, no, it's all right. Like you can see behind the curtain a little bit. Uh, I don't know if like earlier in my career I'd be as comfortable, but there's also the other side of it where you're like, should I be a person who's talking to people? Like there are plenty of better
Yeah.
people. But the other side of it as well is like I remember having conversations when I wanted to break into the industry from when I was in tech. And a lot of people told me like you got to be in the right place at the right time. And that pissed me off so much because it is the least helpful advice you could ever receive. Like
Yeah.
you could say to somebody, yeah, just like it's all about perseverance, but like still not helpful. It like if we want to say that being in the right place at the right time is the approach, how do I get in the room? Who do I talk to? Who's going to listen to me? And what do I say when I'm there? Like these are the expansions upon that theory that I did not like. So it was like people deserve more of a dialogue in these transition periods. And then the other thing that I was thinking of as well is like, if I am I still consider myself pretty junior in the running space, after I started officially full time in 2019. So I've been very fortunate to kind of build a network. And if I can introduce you to somebody who I look up to in the industry, that's a huge win. And then the only thing that I want from that experience is I want these people to get hired or like to produce something really cool. And they don't have to like, I don't want any credit or any reference. I just want to know. And if you tell me like, "Yo, I got the job," that is the coolest thing to me. So every Wednesday and Friday when I'm not traveling, I open up my lunch hour. Um,
Who should reach out? Anyone who's trying to work in the running industry or
yeah, so I'm glad you asked because it's a really like wide array of people. Some people are kind of like they work at other brands and they're like, "Hey, I just wanted to say hey and introduce myself and
connect?
let's build our network and maybe we can do something cool together one day." Other people are looking for um, a move within the industry, or whether it's within their company to move up or to um, to a new company. And then other people are like, looking to get their first job in the industry. Some people are freelancers that converge with the industry. So it's all about like, I mean, I get a lot of people in the creative field being like, how do I get the attention of a brand when I want to do work for them? And I think that's been really valuable for me and them to understand where they're coming from and to kind of share some thoughts because I'm not the only person in the industry who's making these decisions. So I'm learning a lot through this as well because whether you are 14 or 40, I have a lot to learn from, like, what you bring to the conversation. So, I mean, kind of a non-answer, but I'll talk to anybody. I wish I had more time for it, but I just don't want it to conflict with my 9 to 5, so that's why it's only my lunch hour.
Dude, I think it's so cool. I'm really inspired by our local community. Like I get to do that in person with you all the time on runs or if we're hanging out, and that's really motivated and inspired me. And similarly, in like I'm a running coach, and in that world, I've had so many incredible mentors, and it has drastically changed. And sometimes it's just even like a call like that, someone telling you to keep going or giving you just a word of good advice, it can really make a big difference. So I think it's so cool what you're doing because it's a hard field and world to navigate. Those jobs are tough to get. It's not a lot of companies. So and
Yeah.
dude, and the world is small. Like uh you're gonna see these people, you're all gonna see each other again. I'm doing this thing with Hoka next week, and like so many people that work high up in brands are people I knew 10 years ago, like we were all working at a shoe store together or something, it's like
Yeah.
it's this family that all comes back around. So it's a lot of good karma you're throwing out. Um, I love that, man. So what's next for small brand mentality? You're gonna keep writing a
Yeah.
couple coming up.
Got a few things in the pipeline. So I plan like this is just something that I hope is helpful to anyone listening who's like either doing something right now from a work product perspective or who wants to do something. I'm really good at thinking about something I want to do, and then I do it for 3 months, and then I go, oh, I'm too busy, and I've created an unsustainable structure of producing something. I've done that so many times, common theme in my life. Um, we've talked about this well about like I'll do a project, I'll walk away from it for like 3 to 6 months, and then I'll come back and be like, "That was fun that one time," and then I'll do it for another month and a half, and then I'll walk away again. So, what I'm trying to tell myself is sustainable structures this time around because I do really wanna produce consistently as a benefit for myself and then also as a conversation starter for others. So, I'm committing to doing, like, 1 piece of content minimum a month, whether that's a newsletter or a podcast, thing that maybe we like pull down some learnings into a written, but there will be like episodic things on top of it. So when things feel like newsworthy, for example, right, the Minted Saucony collab, we know, for example, that that shoe is going to launch by a certain date. So I want to write something now and put it out before then. So we might have more than one piece of content in a month. Um, But yeah, I'm committing to one piece per month because I would love to a a goal of this would be get to December and know that there was consistency for the year
Yeah.
of 2025. Um, but yeah, I'm looking forward to learning from like the people who are engaging with me on each platform. So if there's like requests that people want to chat about something in more detail or share an opinion or whatever, like I'm sure there's going to be things that come up over time. But I'm grateful that people want to potentially want to do that with me.
So if we have good ideas, we can just send them to you,
If you have any ideas, you can send them to me. Like that's
even bad ones.
well, I mean, I would argue that like it's on a team to like create value out of ideas. The amount of like our long run discussions that we've had, Will, that are like, I don't know, they're like half baked and they're searching for answers and they're maybe a little less polished, but all it takes is a little bit of refinement to get like a value based discussion out of it. So I know I'm like speaking very politically correct right now by saying that, but I don't know. I think there's a good challenge in being like, there's value or there's a kernel in every opinion, right? Like there's a kernel of truth in every opinion, whether it's experience based or value based. And then it's a matter of like teasing that out and then expanding upon it.
Yeah.
Like can be super naive to say, but that's I hope a guiding light in this.
Well, dude, I'm super stoked to keep reading and following along and listen to the stories. It's been fun already, and yeah, I can feel your passion coming through the writing, and so it's gonna be cool to engage and listen. So you're writing on Substack, right? Small Brand Mentality.
Yeah.
Where do if people want to connect for one of those calls, where do they find you at?
Yeah, so I think the best way, to connect with me on those platforms is mainly through LinkedIn,
Yeah,
or my
bro.
my
Yeah,
Instagram, 'cause I kinda link them both out from there. So on LinkedIn, if you wanted to look me up,
and
my name's Drew Hartman, Hartman, and I have it linked as a thing there, and then my Instagram is at Hartman, Hartman.io, uh, and I have it linked in my bio. I'm not trying to go overboard and create a million platforms to engage with me on and creating separate Instagrams and stuff. So I think, this is a personal endeavor. So let's keep it personal. Let's not let a platform get in the way of connecting. But
yeah.
I want to thank you for being my counterpart on this, Will. And I hope that we can like have you back as we converge in this realm. And yeah, as always, I appreciate your perspective and questions, man.
Sick, dude. Yeah, we'll link everything. And what else? What other parting words do you have about small brand mentality?
Ooh, I would say I feel like I've given a little bit of uh personal encouragement on like just create and this project is a publicly facing endeavor, but like there's no reason why somebody can't take on the same format or goals, but then keep it internal and like challenge themselves to engage a little bit more with their opinions around things. And maybe you shop it around in like a small group, or maybe you keep it to yourself. But I think there's a lot of value in exercising this thought experiment. So I encourage folks to kind of do the same. And if they want to put it out there in the world, I commend you for it.
I love it, man. I think that's great. Cool. Well, yeah, like I said, excited to follow along. We'll link everything, and thanks for writing and sharing everything with us, man.
Thanks, Will.
Cool.